My colleague Nick Bonvoisin, who works at the Espoo Secretariat, has asked me to inform you here today that the case that was brought before the Espoo Implementation Committee on the Bistro Canal case by Romania with respect to Ukraine, the committee has reached a conclusion on this case. It is not public yet. It has not been communicated yet, but my colleague asked me to inform you that the decision will be communicated, or the conclusion of the committee will be communicated in the course of this week, and as soon as it has been communicated, it will be made public. So you can expect that information to come to you very soon. With respect to the work on improvement of implementation, because as you can imagine, in the cases that are brought to the committees, to the Implementation Committee and the Compliance Committee, and the National Implementation Reports, they all point to weaknesses in implementation and problems. And the secretariats have a limited role in contributing to the improvement of implementation, but we do what we can. We are not experts on legislation of individual countries when it comes to transposing the conventions or the EU directives. But what we can do is serve to collect information from various sources that is relevant for a broad range of countries. All the parties to the conventions, but also countries that have not yet become a party to the conventions and may one day want to become a party. We try to share this information we collect, and we try to make it useful for national implementation and transposition of the conventions and also the corresponding related EU directives. In this way, we try to serve legislators, policymakers, lawyers, judges, members of the public, so that they can use this information in a practical way at the national level and use it as a tool to improve implementation and transposition in their own countries, within their own communities, and in their own ways, their own instruments, and with their own, according to their own viewpoint as well. With respect to implementation of the public participation pillar of the Aarhus Convention, this was found to be insufficient during the first 10 years since it was adopted in 1998. As a consequence, last year, in 2008, the meeting of the parties to the Aarhus Convention decided to take action on this lack of implementation of the public participation provisions. And it established an expert group on public participation and mandated this expert group to advise the meeting of the parties on the terms of reference of a task force on public participation in decision-making. The first meeting of the expert group took place this summer, and it negotiated a first draft of the terms of reference for a task force on public participation. These terms of reference have been discussed by an annual meeting of representatives of the parties in July, and the terms of reference for this task force on public participation are expected to be adopted next year in the context of the first meeting of the parties to the PRTR protocol, which is scheduled in April 2010. During the first meeting of the expert group this summer, different problems and challenges were discussed with respect to implementing the public participation provisions, but also possible solutions. And I would like to share this information with you because I think this information is part of is what's most useful, I think, to this conference among all the stuff, all the information that our Secretariat has to offer. This information is hot off the press. The report has not been published yet, so what I'm about to tell you is very relevant. It's not outdated, it's very up to date. The problems that were discussed this summer include, and I'm sorry to be giving you a list, or a shopping list, if you will, but this is the most condensed and most concise way that I could distill what was discussed. So please bear with me. One problem is that legislative developments have taken place in many countries, but that implementing regulations are often missing. And I think this was also part of what came out in the guide that was presented here today. Another problem is the need for a common definition and a consistent interpretation of the terms "the public concerned." Another problem that was discussed was the problem of when public participation needs to be provided, when you have a decision-making process that has multiple levels or that tries to incorporate requirements under different legal instruments. A lack of control over the level and quality of public participation was also observed, and a lack of detailed provisions on how the public should be notified. The result of this is that the notification of the public often is just not performed adequately. And finally, this is a problem that is also related to access to justice, is that the standing criteria for NGOs have been narrowed in some countries, which is also perceived as an impediment to public participation. A lack of reasonable time frames is another persistent problem, as well as a lack of early public participation. An access to information topic that also has a strong impact on public participation is lack of complete and accessible information. So it is incredibly important to ensure that information is complete and is freely accessible and easily accessible to the public and the concerned public in particular. Then from a more legal point of view, an absence of legislation was observed with respect to the implementation of Article 6, paragraphs 5, 9 and 10. And also there was an observation of a lack of regulations to regulate public participation procedures under all three of the public